Well, hello, my name is Greene, and I'm so glad to have this opportunity just to be able to talk with you today about how my communication over time has developed, how I have become a better communicator throughout my family, throughout relationships, throughout friendships, just becoming an overall effective communicator through experiences in my life. So today, that's what I want to talk about. I want to talk about how my communication has actually developed over time. And the way I'm going to do this is I'm going to use practical stories that have happened in my life that I've learned from. I'm going to use experiences varying from all different angles, all different types of people that I've interacted with, all different ages and times in my life and situations, but using those situations to develop my communication and become overall a more effective communicator. But before I get into that, I will say that before I even get into any of this, one thing that I have learned more than anything is that experience is indeed the ultimate key to effective communication. We can be taught it. We can be taught communication skills. We can be taught how to interact with people and how to line up perspectives with people. But at the end of the day, the ultimate key to effective communication is just being in the situation, learning from mistakes, learning from experiences, and that's what I've learned so far. So let's get into what we're going to talk about today. The first thing I'm going to talk about is how I learned to manage conflict in relationships. And I'm going to talk about a particular situation in my life with a significant other that I had. And I'm going to show you how I learned to manage conflict in relationship that way. The next thing I'm going to talk about is how I learned to avoid losing friends close to me. I'm going to talk about how I had a friend that was really close to me, and then a situation came up, and it seems like I had lost that friend, but because I responded a certain way, I ended up gaining that friend back. So we're going to talk about that. Then we're going to move into talking about how I learned what a committed romantic relationship looks like. We're going to look at my parents' relationship and how they have been committed over time. And talk about the model that they've given me to basically be an effective communicator in romantic relationships. And then lastly, I'm going to talk about how I learned that family communication differs from family to family. What I'm going to do there is I'm going to look at my family's values and how I compared my family's values to another family's values in a certain situation in my life, and how that taught me how family communication differs from family to family. So let's get into it. So the first thing I want to get into is managing conflict in relationships. But before I say that, I will say I have certain values that are going to be constant throughout each one of these different segments that I'm talking about. And that's my very strong Christian values. And I know this seems like it's thrown in there, but it's actually very relevant to this topic, is why I bring it up now. I grew up in church. My parents were ministers, and I am now myself a minister. So I'm just surrounded with that strong Christian foundation, Christian values growing up. And I tell you that to say that I haven't always had those values. I know my family grew up in ministry and had those values, but I, as a younger person, wanted to kind of stray away from those values and get to myself and kind of discover my own values. So I hadn't always had those. But my goal growing up, quite honestly, was to find the next romantic relationship. That was my ultimate goal in life. I know it was very shallow, but it was my ultimate goal. And with that being said, I got into a relationship with someone who did not have Christian values. At the time, it was not a problem. It wasn't. It was no problem with that because we didn't have those values. But in the middle of the relationship, my perspective actually began to change. I actually started to discover that, yes, I did want these Christian values. Yes, I did want to hold on to these roots that I had growing up. As a matter of fact, I wanted to pursue ministry. I felt like God was leading me there, but I wanted to pursue that. So my values began to change. And because of that, I wasn't wanting to be in a romantic relationship with someone who had different values than my Christian values. Not that there was anything wrong with the other person's values, but not that there's anything wrong with her values, but I personally didn't want to have values with somebody or be with somebody who had different values than my Christian values. It wasn't anything against her. It's just I didn't want different values. But to make a long story short, we ended up breaking up. We ended up splitting up. And I know that sounds bad, but I honestly think it was a win-win outcome because we both got to hold on to the values we wanted instead of trying to hold on to a relationship with opposing values. And that could have ended up being a disaster. But I will say what I learned from the situation is that before getting into a romantic relationship, I think both parties' values need to be established. And they need to make sure that both people need to make sure that their values match each other's. And if they don't match each other's, the parties both need to make sure that they're okay with the other person's values. And I believe if you do these three things, you establish the values early, make sure they match, and if they don't match, make sure that you're okay with the opposing values, then all conflict in romantic relationships will be a lot easier to manage, will be a lot easier to handle once those values line up, because the core of the problem, the values at the core of the problem will line up, so it'll be easier to manage. So that's what I learned through managing conflict in relationship. It's that the core is the values, and once you line the values up, all conflict is a lot easier to manage. Next, I want to talk about a time where I learned that effective communication can really help you keep friends, even though conflict may arise, how that friendship can still be established and you can get through the conflict. So I want to talk about is a friend of mine, and we had this friendship that we established, and it was established because we both found out that we really love football. We like the same team. We both like the same sport. So that's really how our initial conversation started. We started talking about football, and also we found out that just like I was talking about before, this person had the same Christian values as myself. We both believed the same thing. We both kind of raised up the same way. So through sports and religion, we kind of established a friendship. And we ended up going to a sporting event together. We ended up scheduling a time to hang out where we could go to a sporting event and, kind of get to know each other, kind of hang out, see each other outside of work. I met him at work, so we wanted to see each other outside of work. And on the way, we kind of found out about each other. On the way, we talked about both the football values, the Christian values, and I got to know him. He got to know me. Also, we discovered each other's goals and intentions in life. We were both in school. So we discovered what we wanted to do outside of school, what we wanted to do after school with the degrees that we were seeking and stuff like that. And we began to develop a closeness through spending time together, through talking, and we were equally investing in this friendship. After I had much dialogue, he had much dialogue. We both gave our time and energy into this friendship. We equally invested, and this strong friendship was established. Well, at one point in time, we had a slight disagreement. There was something that he believed that I didn't believe, and it was kind of conflicting. Instead of a disagreement, it actually turned out into a situation where we thought we lost each other's friendships. We didn't talk for a few days. He got quite upset with me, but afterwards, he actually came back and apologized. A few days later, after everything cooled off, he came back and apologized. He said, I'm sorry for the way I acted. I know you might not believe that, and I might believe this, but hey, we have this friendship. I'm not going to let that one little thing get in the way of our friendship. So through this situation, what I actually learned is that investment is the key to friendship, and maintaining strong friendships through conflict. It's investment. We gain investment through dialogue. We gain investment through doing things with each other. See, if I had invested time and energy, if he had invested time and energy in this situation, and then perhaps me and him would not be friends today. But investment's the key to maintaining friendship through conflict and establishing a strong friendship. So the next thing that we're going to get into is what a committed romantic relationship looks like. And I've kind of been able to see this through my parents' relationship. My parents have 4 kids. They've been married around 30 years. It's both of their first marriage. There's never been any talk of divorce or anything like that. And see, growing up, I just thought that this was the way it was always supposed to be. I didn't realize that things don't always work out. I didn't realize that divorce was an option. As a matter of fact, whenever my friends would say, hey, I'm going to my stepmom or my stepdad's house, I didn't even know what that means. I'm not saying that to brag on my parents, but what I'm saying is when I figured that out, when I figured out that, it doesn't always work out, and my friends' parents, a lot of their parents were split up, it made me question, and I began to look at my parents and see what was different about their relationship, what was so special about their relationship to where they didn't split up, and I began to examine them in that way. I found that it was actually a combination of the 2 previous things that we talked about. I found out that both my parents have the same values. They lined up those values and they have the same values. I also found out that it was investment, putting time and energy and work into the relationship. I found out that time and investment were so crucial in maintaining a healthy relationship. But I also found out it was some other central things like mindful listening. I found out mindful listening was a very important thing. Just being able to hear the other person out, understand where they're coming from, understanding their perspective, and not, having that separation in communication, not having that separation in conflict, because you're able to hear each other out, because you're able to, see things the way they see them and feel for what they feel for and empathize with them, And the other thing, another thing is sacrifice, putting the other's needs, putting the other's desires before yours. A lot of times, no, I'm not saying that you should, just give everything to that person and they should always come first. See, there is that balance there where at times you have to do what's best for you, but also at times, not being selfish and doing what's best for the other person. And that works both ways. When you have that equal balance, that's a healthy relationship. And also the last thing is understanding the commitment, establishing the terms of the commitment. And I believe my parents have done a very good job with that. Understanding that this is a commitment. It's not a decision. It's not something they did off of a feeling, that they're in it for the long haul, and divorce isn't an option. So lining up values, investment, mindful listening, sacrifices, and understanding the commitment. These things have taught me what a romantic relationship should look like and how to keep it healthy and how to manage conflict when it does arise. So if you've hung with me this long, I do want to appreciate your time. But there's just one more thing I want to talk about, and that's how I learned that family communication differs from family to family. So growing up, we all have central things that are important. We know that. For me and my family, it was faith and it was football. We spent every Sunday, the first half of the Sunday, preparing everything at the church, making sure that was okay. And then the second half was really dedicated to pretty much watching as much football as we could. And having these things instilled in me for all my childhood, it created a perception in my mind of how American culture was supposed to be. I figured that my family was this way, so every family was this way. Every family spent the whole first half of Sunday preparing for church and then watching football the rest of the Sunday. That's kind of how my perception of culture was. And I thought that all families were supposed to be this way. It was when I went to another friend's house to have dinner when I was 16 that I realized that that wasn't always the case. The same passion that I had for football, this person, my friend, also in their family had a passion for another subject. And just like I had my own language or whatever you want to call it for football, they had their own language or lingo for this thing that they were very passionate about. They knew more about the subject than I could even imagine. And I know this isn't a very long story, but what I learned is that even within the American culture, there is different cultures even within the culture. So, and I learned that the best way to communicate from family to family is kind of some of the same things that we've already talked about in the 3 previous segments, and that's investment. Spending, giving your time, giving your resources to get to know the person, to get to know their kind of family culture, to get to know the things that their family values, so you can communicate effectively with them and you can create that bond. Another thing is time. Investment takes time. That's where the time comes in. Just giving your time to find out about them. And another thing is mindful listening, as we've talked about already before. Just kind of talking to them to get to know them and kind of really trying to grasp where they're coming from, grasp their values and such. And lastly, research. When you find out the things that they are valuable about, when you find out the things that they love, research them. Research and find out all you can about that subject. Research all that's available to know so that you can communicate. And hopefully they'll do the same, and you'll be able to have effective communication within families. And that's how I learned that family communication is different from family to family, and how to manage it from family to family. So I appreciate your time. I appreciate you listening to this video to find out how I've learned to effectively communicate, learn to be a better communicator, a better social interactor through my life experiences. And I hope you can do the same. I hope you can analyze your experiences and figure out things in your life that have happened to help you to become a better and more effective communicator. I hope you have a wonderful day, and I appreciate you listening.